With changes in the social structure, the society has witnessed various punishment theories. They have undergone changes from the traditional to the modern level, touching the crucial problems relating to them. Kenny wrote, "It cannot be said that the theories of criminal punishment current amongst our judges and legislators have assumed either a coherent or even a stable form." B. Malinowski believes that the entire criminal justice system aims at cutting short an illegal or intolerable state of affairs and restoring the equilibrium in the social life. It is generally believed that the theories of punishment are vague. According to Sir John Salmond, punishments are of four types. They are deterrent, retributive, preventive, and reformative. This classification holds good even today. Of these aspects, the first is the essential and the all-important one, the others being merely accessories. Punishment, before all things, is deterrent, and the chief end of law of crime is to create an example and giving a warning to all who are criminal. Various theories and the pros and cons of each theory are discussed in this unit. We start our discussions with the question, why and how the guilty should be punished. The first question can be easily answered. Of the many classifications of crime, one classification is crimes with victims and crimes without victims. The first category implies that there are direct victims for every crime, and the second category implies that there are no direct victims, which means there may be indirect victims. For example, while crimes like dacoity and robbery have direct victims, many white-collar crimes like high-level corruption do not have direct victims. However, it may be said that in such crimes, the government often becomes the victim. This prelude becomes necessary to find answer to the question why the guilty should be punished. At this juncture, we do not go into the question what is a crime. When a crime creates a victim, there are three implications. One is the victimization of a certain degree, and secondly, any crime defined by the Indian Penal Code is a violation of the law of the land. Thirdly, the punishment given to the offender should become a lesson for the rest of the people with criminal tendencies. These three implications answer the question why the guilty should be punished. The guilty should be punished so that the social order could be maintained. It may be said that there cannot be a crime without a punishment. Therefore, it may be said that every crime must have a punishment. Now we take up the question how the guilty should be punished. Although the laws of the land may differ from country to country, the general principle which provides guideline to the punishment is that a crime should have a punishment in proportion to the severity and extent of victimization. This principle again differs from country to country with different religions and their codes. The British laws of punishments are in practice in the present Commonwealth countries, while the United States has its own laws which are a little different from the British laws. The countries of the Middle East and other countries practicing Islam as the first religion have their own laws derived from their religion. Similarly, crimes also are viewed differently in different countries and in different periods, and this in turn have its own impact on the extent of punishments. In the Middle Eastern countries, even low profile stealing is viewed seriously and punished severely, while in India it is viewed less seriously or even ignored by the law enforcers and the society as well. Moreover, the Indian Penal Code also has provisions to consider the circumstances under which a crime was committed, This means, to some extent, circumstantial justification of a crime is also allowed. Now that every country has its own criminal justice system, the guilty is punished according to the law of the land and in proportion to the degree of victimization. The Indian Penal Code defines various crimes under various sections and thereby defines the punishments stated already. One of the primitive methods of punishments believes in the fact that severe punishments inflicted on the offender would deter him from repeating that crime. Those who commit a crime, it is assumed, derive a mental satisfaction or a feeling of enjoyment in the act. To neutralize this inclination of the mind, punishment should inflict equal quantum of suffering on the offender so that it is no longer attractive for him to carry out such committal of crimes. An average human being is always interested to seize opportunities, but abhor when he or she face threats. But in reality, pain, threat or challenges actually strengthens and purifies a man and so an organization. Jeremy Bentham, the founder of this theory, states, general prevention ought to be the chief end of punishment as its real justification. An unpunished crime leaves the path of crime open, not only to the same delinquent, but also to all those who may have the same motives and opportunities for entering upon it. Then we perceive that punishment inflicted on the individual becomes a source of security for all. Bentham's theory was based on a hedonist conception of man, and that man as such would be deterred from crime if punishment were applied swiftly, certainly and severely. But being aware that punishment is an evil, he says, if the evil of punishment exceeds the evil of the offense, the punishment will be unprofitable. The basic idea of deterrence is to deter both offenders and others from committing a similar offense. But in Bentham's theory, there was the idea that punishment would also provide an opportunity for reform. While a person goes on seeking pleasure, he also takes steps to avoid pain. This is a new system of political philosophy and ethics developed by Jerome Bentham and John Stuart Mill in the 19th century called utilitarianism. It postulates human efforts towards maximization of pleasure and minimization of pain as the goal. The main ethical imperative of utilitarianism is the greatest good for the largest number of people. The fear of consequent punishment at the hands of law should act as a check from committing crimes by the people. The law violator not merely gets punishment, but he has to undergo an obnoxious process like arrest, production before a magistrate, trial in a criminal court, etc., that bring about a social stigma to him as the accused. All these infuse a sense of fear and pain, and one thinks twice before venturing into committing a crime, unless he is hardcore criminal or one who has developed a habit for committing crimes. Deterrent theory believes in giving exemplary punishment through adequate penalty. In the earlier days, a criminal act was considered to be due to the influence of some evil spirit on the offender for which he was not directly responsible. Thus, to correct that offender, the society resorted to severe deterrent policies. But in spite of all these efforts, there are some lacunae in this theory. This theory is unable to deter the activity of the hardcore criminals as the pain inflicted or even the penalties are ineffective. The most mockery of this theory can be seen when the criminals return to the prisons soon after their release. These criminals are not affected at all by these restrictions of conviction. Rather, they tend to enjoy these restrictions more than they enjoy their freedom. Now we turn to the retributive theory. An eye for an eye would turn the whole world blind, rightly said Mahatma Gandhi. The most stringent and harsh of all the theories, the retributive theory believes to end the crime in itself. This theory underlines the idea of vengeance and revenge rather than that of social welfare and security. Punishment of the offender provides some kind of solace to the victim or to the family members of the victim of the crime who has suffered out of the action of the offender and prevents reprisals from them to the offender or his family. The only reason for keeping the offender in the prison under unpleasant circumstances would be the vengeful pleasure of the sufferer and his family. J. M. Finis argues in favor of retributionism by mentioning it as a balance of fairness in the distribution of advantage and disadvantages by restraining the victim's will. Retributives believe that considerations under social protection may serve a minimal purpose of the punishment. Traditional retributionism relied on punishing the intrinsic value of the offense and thus resort to very harsh methods. This theory is based on the same principle as the deterrent theory and the utilitarian theory. This includes our sense of hatred towards the criminals and a reliance on him as a butt of aggressive outbursts. According to Sir Walter Moberly, punishment serves to express and to satisfy the righteous indignation which a healthy community treats as transgression. As such, it is an end in itself. The utilitarian theories are forward-looking. They are concerned with the consequences of punishment rather than the wrong done, which, being in the past, cannot be altered. A retributive theory, on the other hand, sees the primary justification in the fact that an offense has been committed which deserves the punishment of the offender. Kant argues that retribution is not just a necessary condition for punishment, but also a sufficient one. Punishment is an end in itself. Retribution could also be said to be the natural justification in the sense that a man thinks it quite natural and just that a bad person ought to be punished and a good person rewarded. However natural retribution might seem, it can also be seen as Bentham saw it, that is, as adding one evil to another, base and repugnant, or as an act of wrath or vengeance. Therefore, as we consider divine punishment, as we must bear in mind, and as Rowell says, the doctrine of hell was framed in terms of a retributive theory of punishment, the wicked receiving their just deserts with no thought of the possible reformation of the offender. Insofar as there was no deterrent element, it related to the sanction of hell provided for ensuring moral conduct during a man's earthly life. Thus, we see that this theory is closely related to that of expiation, as the pain inflicted compensates for the pleasure derived by the offender. The significance of the retributive theory lies in the fear, which still plays an important role in the minds of various first-time offenders. But the basis of this theory, that is vengeance, is not accepted in a civilized society. This theory has been severely criticized by modern-day penologists and is redundant in present-day punishments. And now we turn to the preventive theory. Unlike the former theories, this theory aims to prevent the crime rather than avenging it. Looking at punishments from a more humane perspective, it rests on the fact that the need of a punishment for a crime arises out of mere social needs. That is, while sending the criminals to the prisons, the society is in turn trying to prevent the offender from doing any other crime and thus protecting the society from any antisocial elements. Prevention is better than remedy is a globally accepted dictum. Thus, it must be quite clear now that the law only aims at providing general threats but not convictions at the beginning itself. Even utilitarians such as Bentham have also supported this theory, as it has been able to discourage the criminals from doing a wrong, and that also without causing any severity on the criminals. The present day prisons are fallout of this theory. The preventive theory can be explained in the context of imprisonment as separating the criminals from the society and thus preventing any further crime by that offender. Also, by putting certain restrictions on the criminal, it would prevent the criminal from committing any offense in the future. Supporters of this theory may also take capital punishment to be a part of this theory. A serious and diligent rehabilitation program would succeed in turning a high percentage of criminals away from a life of crime. There are, however, many reasons why rehabilitation programs are not effective in our prisons. Most politicians and a high proportion of the public do not believe in rehabilitation as a desirable goal. The idea of rehabilitation implies the crime is legally accepted. What they want is retribution, revenge, punishment, and suffering. Thus, one can easily say that preventive theory, though aiming at preventing the crime to happen in the future, but the penologists question the technique, which are quite harsh in nature. The major problem with the penological types of theories is that they make the criminal more violent rather than changing him into a better individual. The last theory of punishment, being the most humane of all, looks into the aspect. And now we turn to the reformative theory. The reformative theory aims at gradual renewal of a man and his gradual regeneration, of his passing from one world into another, of his initiation into a new unknown life. It emphasizes on the renewal of the criminal and the beginning of a new life for him. The most recent and the most humane of all theories are based on the principle of reforming the offenders through individual treatment. Not looking to the criminals as inhuman, this theory puts forward the changing nature of the modern society, where it presently looks into the fact that all other theories have failed to put forward any such stable theory which would prevent the occurrence of further crimes. Though it may be true that there has been a greater onset of crimes today than it was earlier, it may also be argued that many of the criminals are also getting reformed and leading a law-abiding life altogether. Reformative techniques are much close to the deterrent techniques. Reform in the deterrent sense implies that through punishment, the offender recognizes his guilt and wishes to change. The formal and impressive condemnation by the society involved in punishment was thought to be an important means of bringing about that recognition. Similarly, others may be brought to the awareness that crime is wrong through another's punishment. But although this is indeed one aspect of rehabilitation, it is more usually associated with treatment of the offender. Very few think that all the offenders are ill and need to be cured, but the majority of criminologists see punishment as a means of education of the offender. This has been the ideal and therefore the most popular theory in recent years. However, there is reason to believe this theory is in decline. Lord Windlesham has noted that if public opinion affects penal policy as he thinks it, then there will be more interest shown in retribution in the future. This theory aims at rehabilitating the offender to the norms of the society, that is, into law-abiding member. This theory condemns all kinds of corporal punishments. These aim at transforming the law offenders in such a way that the inmates of the penal-correctional institutions can lead a life like a normal citizen. These prisons, or correctional homes as they are termed humanly, treat the inmates and release them as soon as they are fit to mix up with the other members of the community. The reformation generally takes place either through probation or parole as measures for reforming the criminals. It looks at the seclusion of the criminals from the society as an attempt to reform them and to prevent them from social ostracism. Though this theory works stupendously for the correction of juveniles and first-time criminals, in the case of hardened criminals, this theory may not work well. In such cases, deterrence theories and the retributive theories have greater application. Reformative theories are now widely accepted at the global level in spirit and letters. Compared to the early periods, the later half of the 20th century and more particularly the last one decade have witnessed great changes in the prison conditions in India and many other countries. Delhi Tihar jail presents now a much better condition when compared to what it was many years back. Many kinds of reformative measures such as educational facilities for those who want to continue their education, games and sports, yoga clubs, recreational facilities, medical facilities, visits by members of the family, free legal aid, vocational training facilities are provided to the inmates in the midst of rigorous prison conditions. Mrs. Kiran Bedi, IPS, former DGP of Delhi, successfully conducted yoga programs for thousands of the inmates of Tihar jail when she was in charge of the Tihar jail. The Indira Gandhi Open University is doing a yeoman service in this regard by extending its educational programs to most of the central jails in the country. In the state central prison of Tamil Nadu, established at Pulal near Chennai, many correctional measures stated above have been introduced during the past 7 to 8 years. There are also open prisons in many states in India, where the prisoners are kept in more liberal conditions. In the open prisons, the inmates are allowed to go to the neighboring city or town during the daytime on condition that they should return in the evening. Such open prisons do not have security walls, bars or armed guards around. Members of the family or friends are allowed to visit the inmates during daytime. The inmates are also given work in the prison camp during daytime and are paid wages for their work. They can use these wages to buy their requirements in the prison canteen. All these measures, which are in line with the Human Rights Manifest of the UN, aim at reforming the convicts and putting them back into the mainstream of life. Such open prisons are found in many countries today. In conclusion, we can say that although reformative punishments are accepted in principle all over the world, except in Muslim countries, the other three principles, that is, deterrent, retributive and preventive, are found predominantly in the criminal justice system. In the criminal courts, the tone with which punishments are awarded are mostly in terms of retribution and not reformation. The principle of reformation is applied only in the case of juvenile offenders.